Predominantly, people are worried about things like wokeism. They're worried about CRT. They're worried about indoctrination. What's West Ada's position on this stuff? Thank you for coming, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You are the chief academic officer for West Ada, yes?
I am.
Fantastic. There's so much discussion about public schools, and this is a national conversation, obviously, not one just harassing you at West Ada, but West Ada very luckily gets the fallout from all of the crazy in the surrounding states. The big conversation that a lot of parents are worried about when they move here initially is, look, can I even send my kids to the public schools? Because a lot of public schools in states like California or Washington have gone awry, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's. And then the question becomes, okay, well, how is West Ada different? What does West Ada do? Predominantly, people are worried about things like wokeism. They're worried about CRT. They're worried about indoctrination. What's West Ada's position on this stuff?
So West Ada is hyper-focused on making sure that our students walk away with the skills and understandings around the Idaho core content standards and our adopted curriculum and our adopted resources, and making sure that they're walking away with an understanding of success in college and career readiness in year 13. That is our students across the stage graduating successful and leaving with opportunities because they've mastered some understandings and essential skills, and they can then take those skills into the workplace, into the college and career field, and they can apply those skills and develop their own opinions through their own family values and their own personal values.
So you're not interested then, it sounds like, in expressing values that people should be holding or expressing positions people should be like. How do you go through curriculum then without saying like how do you hit history?
Well, first thing we do is we prioritize, right? We have a finite number of days with students over the course of the year. We have 177 days and about 6 hours to get the job done each and every single day. And so when we prioritize, what is it that we want our students to know? What are those standards that we've agreed and adopted? In doing so, we have a very small amount of time to make sure that students can master that we provide those students who have mastered it opportunities for enrichment, and for those students who haven't had an opportunity yet, an opportunity to intervene and to make sure that we're providing that support. That small finite amount of time keeps us hyper-focused on those essential standards, those core content standards, and making absolutely sure that every student walks away from that. And in all reality, we don't have time for the additional pieces. We want to make sure that we're stepping in and that we're supporting students. And when we know a student walks across the stage in West Ada, that they're walking away with a key set of understandings toward those standards where then they can be successful.
Okay, so the bottom line is it sounds like you're focused on things that will get people across the finish line from a curriculum basic standpoint.
Absolutely. And we are the vessel by which that happens, right? We are the system by which that happens, and students gather that success, and we monitor and assess that along the way to make sure that they're being successful. We intervene when they're not, and we enrich when they're doing well. We want to be able to provide those opportunities, and those opportunities for West Ada students, and part of college and career readiness is walking away with the understandings and skill sets to be critical purveyors of their information and to be able to develop their own opinions and thoughts around the world in which they, the world that's around them, and to be able to take those into a college and career workplace. It isn't our job to develop those opinions for them. It's our job to make sure that they have an essential understanding of standards and then use those standards to develop their own opinions and their own visions for where their life is heading. And then they can develop those and implement those within the college and career workforce.
Okay, here's a question then. There's obviously, there's not a lot of flexibility in math.
There
right?
is
like
not.
I do not think a lot of people think that math has become, although some make the argument for it, I don't think in practice math has become a stage for indoctrination by most people's standards and concerns. But things like social studies, civics, history, things of that nature, that's where people get really concerned about a certain light or filter or bent being put on the material. So, for instance, something like pilgrims, people going, Emancipation Proclamation, people going across the United States, the relationship between settlers and Native Americans. How do you guys navigate that from a standpoint of, okay, we need to get this information out, but not try to indoctrinate people at the same time? Like, how do you facilitate those that not only information distribution, but also facilitate discussions to help students figure it out. MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.
So the information really starts with clarity around what are the documents that a teacher accesses in order to know exactly by the end of this course, here's what a student needs to know, right? Because what a student needs to know is directly tied to those standards. And so we have systems in place with curriculum documents, with support guides and resources that a teacher will access, right? That board adopted curriculum, that is those board adopted resources and supplemental materials. And those are the only things that they're accessing in order to present that information to students, right? So in reference to what you're speaking of with history and maybe some of the liberal arts that way, we want to make sure that we're presenting the board adopted curriculum that way, tied to those standards. And then with that presentation, it becomes the skill set of teaching to design conversations with students that are led by students and driven by students, so that they can walk away with formulating an opinion, with developing a thesis, with having the evidence behind that thesis. It's our job to teach the processes by where a human comes up with their own opinion and develops their own thesis, not necessarily that opinion in their thesis themselves.
So, got it. The idea is then, look, we have an agreed upon source of material that you can draw from and distribute, or that you need to draw from and you need to distribute. And then part of it becomes the technique of the individual teacher to manipulate or facilitate,
Absolutely.
not necessarily manipulate students, but facilitate conversations and steer people in directions that would help them formulate their own opinion, not steer them in a direction where it's like, aha, and now you arrive at my conclusion.
In addition to that, what it requires on behalf of district leadership and what it happens on behalf of school leadership is that we need to present opportunities throughout the course of the year to continually, hold opportunities for professional development around here are the standards, here are the instructional strategies tied to those standards that best meet student needs in terms of learning that information. Here's how we assess that information moving forward, because you expect what you inspect, right? In terms of that. And so when we establish expectations around here's exactly what a kid's going to learn, and we clearly articulate and communicate what those are to our teaching teams. And then when we assess that along the way and expect those results and when we inspect those results, it allows us to make adjustments along the way. But again, those adjustments are all tied right back to, has that student mastered that standard? How have they demonstrated mastery of that standard? And what are we going to do if they have or they haven't? Because we've clearly articulated that in order to be successful when they walk away from our system, they need to be able to have a mastery of this standard.
Now, the standards that you need at, over the 13-year period that you have these students, who determines the standards?
Yeah.
Because one big criticism of out-of-state districts, not yours, and out-of-state systems is they're actually dumbing down the standards because they're failing to achieve agreed upon benchmarks like certain grade point averages or certain barriers to entry within higher education. They're failing to achieve these successfully. And so they've dumbed down those standards so that they can still consider themselves successful. I don't think Idaho has done that, one. And correct me if I'm wrong, no?
Nope, we have not.
Okay, great. And then beyond that, who figures out those standards? Because again, there's been a fluctuation of curriculum over the years, say over the last 20 years. I know Common Core has kind of come and gone. And who determines the standards that represent a successful education by West Ada?
Yeah, so the Idaho core content standards are adopted at a state level. And then it is up to districts then with local control to be able to determine when those standards are mastered by students at what particular grade levels. Okay. And so what we make absolutely sure of is then we pull together teaching teams, we pull together administrative teams and curriculum teams, and we align those standards to a K-12 system. So we take those content standards, we basically sequence those out over the course of a K-12 student's education. And then we determine in these courses, here's exactly when those standards are going to be learned, taught, and tested. Okay. What we want to be able to do within that is that, one, that allows us to create a system of rigor with that. It allows us to say, here are the foundational understanding skills, here's what it looks like at mastery, and then here's what the transfer of that information looks like in terms of being able to enrich, right? And to be able to move on and transfer it to other subject areas and take this one particular skill and apply it over multiple subjects. So it allows us to build that rigor into it. Now, again, these are the minimum standards we need to meet. We then extend that in terms of how students transfer that into other subject areas and integrate it into other subject areas.
Gotcha. As far as another touchy subject, when you're talking about standards and curriculum, there's a big concern about how much technology is being utilized within the district, and that's K all the way to 12, because West Ada is fortunate enough to have the resources to have a one-to-one technology policy. So, for instance, kindergartners get a Chromebook, and then all the way up through, senior year, obviously. That's something that's new. So how have the standards been adopted or produced for that, excuse me, when that kind of transition really came, honestly, because of COVID, right? Like before that, we weren't, it's my understanding that the country in general was not as concerned with having one-to-one technology. Some very well-to-do and tech-savvy districts somewhere, I'm sure, had it. But it seemed like it pushed everyone to bring this tech level of having some kind of communicating technology in everybody's hands instantaneously.
Mm-hmm. Well, in addition to my response for that, too, I want to go back to just one more question in terms of the, who approves that curriculum and what that looks like. So although the state standards are approved at that state level, then there's that local control over the board adopts the curriculum and the curricular tools for that individual district. And that is true in West Ada as well. Okay. So that is also true of technology standards and what we expect a student to be able to walk away with in year 13 in terms of, I'm using this technology tool in order to access my work, in order to access my school, in order to access my world. Like what are those foundational understandings? So similar to what we would do in mathematics, we would start at a young age. We'd be able to say, here are the foundational skills a kindergartner needs to know. Here are the ones a sixth grader needs to know as they transition into middle school. And then here are the ones a ninth grader needs to know as they transition into high school. At each one of those skill points, what we're saying is, this is how they're going to access their tools. This is how they understand how to access those tools, how to use it appropriately in a school environment, and to make sure that they become responsible purveyors of that tool, right? So at a kindergarten, first grade age level, although they have access to that tool, it is used very minimally within the classroom environment. We do use it as an opportunity to assess students. It is an efficient tool for assessment so that we can identify how close they are to those standards. And for example, in reading, our reading assessment tools are computer-based that way and allows us to be very efficient. Now, any students who we screen as needed additional assistance, that is a one-on-one conversation and an assessment with a teacher live without that screen in front of them. There are also some very efficient intervention tools that are adaptive online so that software can adapt to a student's level of need. Students are hopping on. It's what looks like an environment where they can access that intervention really well. And our evidence suggests that that tool does move students further closer to the standards that way, especially within an intervention opportunity. But we want to make sure at the same time that we balance not just access to that tool and the understanding of how to use it with what is an appropriate developmental use of screen time for a student who's age 5 all the way up to an age of 18, right? And we want to make sure that, yes, those are foundational skills there, but we're not going to teach the essential readings or the essential understandings of how to read using a screen, right? That's going to be a live classroom instruction. That's going to be teacher directed. That's going to make sure that we're having those conversations with students and students are reading aloud to us from printed text. We use the tool as an efficient tool in order to intervene and enrich and have some of those pieces. But at a very young age, that's not a significant component of what a student accesses in order to meet their instructional pieces throughout the course of the school day. As you move up through that age level, similar to what we would expect, a student who graduates is going to be able to access that tool, use it well, use it wisely, and have the understandings of this is how I run this application to produce this in my life. And so we want to make sure that they leave with those skills and understandings. So developmentally at key points throughout their K-12 career, for example, in sixth grade, they're going to have a better understanding through digital tools, which is a course that they'll take in terms of, I need to know how to keyboard. I need to know how to efficiently keyboard. I need to know what it means to produce this document using a word processor. I need to be able to know how then to access these resources and some of these curricular resources through a secure environment so that I can gain some of this information. But again, they're still presented with live instructor, right? They're still presented with text. They're still presented with a book, with a textbook, with the information that they need to know in order so that they can, use that information as well and being able to pull that information off of what is a printed copy, right? Or live instruction that way. As it continues on through, though, we just want to make sure that we balance that along with developmental needs. So a parent should see less usage of technology tools at younger grades. And then as it continues throughout the course of their K-12 span, an increased use of those tools, but without an overdependence on those tools.
Okay. One thing you said was essential use of the tool for development. Well, math is one of those things. English I've never found to be like a real staircase subject. And I know you're supposed to hit some kind of, you obviously have to get better at reading, but once you hit a threshold, it's kind of like, all right, we can go into more English-based stuff.
Yeah, they're more year-long standards, right?
Right. But you're not like, if you miss all of English, like I missed when I was a sophomore in high school, it's not a great situation, but when I was a sophomore in high school, my English teacher's fiance committed suicide, which was terrible. And then we had, it was like 3 to 4 months filled with just substitutes, single day substitutes, just in and out. We were just screwing around. And then we did get a long-term sub for like the last 3 months or something, which was fine. But we missed a big portion of that day. I still went into honors English the following year, and it took me a minute, but we hadn't actually missed that much. It wasn't like if I was in Algebra 2, got the first month of instruction, missed the next 4 to 5 months, and then tried to go into pre-calculus the next year. You're just absolutely not going to have what you need in order to finish these operations. What are the essential pieces, say in like elementary school for, I understand the utilization is like, hey, Johnny, come here, sit down. We're going to have you on this assessment, no sweat. But are there essential pieces that are analogous to a staircase like mathematics that we need to consider when we're considering tech time? Because one person said recently, they're like, hey, you could actually go through West Data without a computer until, whenever, right? Like if I have sons in West Data and I say, hey, I don't want them on this computer, there's a way that I can navigate the educational curriculum
do have that right.
Without that computer. So in considering that, especially in the elementary age, what are things that parents should consider that would lead them to think that a computer is an essential key of that or piece of that education? Because I would presume if it wasn't essential, West Ada wouldn't be putting it out, right? You're not going to go through the expense and difficulty. So what are those essential pieces?
So the first essential piece is early literacy, right? We know that students that can read at grade level on or before 3rd grade are going to be much more successful as they move forward with that, right? It's a shift from learning to read to reading to learn. And there is a point at 3rd grade where students who are proficient in the 3rd grade standard in reading and can fluently read efficiently and comprehend what they're reading are going to be much more successful with that foundational piece. Sure. Have to have that prior to moving on to upper elementary grade levels and then prior to there. So we are duty bound before 3rd grade to make sure that our 3rd grade students are proficient in reading by the end of 3rd grade. In order to do so, we pour a tremendous amount of time and resources and effort into what is making sure that we meet that goal for all 3rd grade students, okay? So that's why if we can access some of our digital tools prior to that time period, the reason I bring up intervention as many times as I did is because we are going to absolutely make sure that that student has every possible opportunity to read proficiently at a 3rd grade level. And if that means additional small group instructional time or one-to-one group instructional intervention time with a teacher, we're going to provide that. If that means there's a tool that we can use on one of our digital tools where students can be presented with that in short terms during the day, and then maybe with some opportunities for additional practice in the evenings with a laptop, we're going to provide that because it is so absolutely critical that by the end of 3rd grade, they read proficiently, that we're willing to pour these resources into it and to do whatever it takes to ensure that that's what happens. But we don't just rely on our digital tools for that, right? So we're going to provide all that instruction we absolutely can. And if it means providing an additional intervention, whether it's instruction with a teacher, whether that's instruction with a classroom assistant, whether or not that's an opportunity in a device environment, we're going to absolutely do that. Because if we can hit that critical point, technology tools are not moving forward, that student is going to have to learn how to read at that point. And then we can use those tools then as we move forward to develop some critical foundational skills in writing. Can this be done with paper pencil? It absolutely can be done with paper pencil. Can it be done through multiple mediums that way? And can we ask students to, after you write it down in paper pencil, let's talk about what it means to like publish your work and use the tools that we have to understand, I have this foundational skills around grammar and mechanics and the structure of writing. And now I have this tool who helps me enhance that and helps me get it better. But do they still have to have those foundational skills and understanding how to write and composition and the handwriting involved behind it? And how I use this paper pencil tool to then make what I create in a digital world even better? Absolutely. But they have to have those foundational skills first. I would say as you move into your middle school and high school environments, again, that standard of writing proficiently at a grade level and communicating well through written language, you're absolutely right. That standard doesn't necessarily change over time. What we expect to see as a result of that student's understanding changes in its levels over time.
Sure,
right?
sure.
You
absolutely.
expect more writing, you expect more composition, more evidence behind that, right?
Sure.
Well-written thesis, well-written designs,
Right.
and the composition of it. That is where then some of our digital tools can help with that. Can you write out that thesis in paper pencil? Absolutely. We've all done that, right? And so those are some of those foundational skills. Now, what can I do to take what I know about writing, translate that into a document on my laptop then that I can enhance and make it better and double check my understanding for all of the work there?
Sure.
That's kind of what that looks like to me. And that's how I see that. I do think too, it's also almost like to a degree, when we ask students, you and I were probably asked at one point to check your work, right? Like go back and check your work, write a second draft, make it better, enhance it, make these revisions and these changes. In a digital environment, we can teach students to efficiently do that in a digital environment, right? To enhance, to make it better, to make some changes, to make and be able to do that in an environment without necessarily manipulating that paper pencil. And that's something we would do as adults as well.
Right. But I mean, we can address revisions. I mean, just with an eraser,
You
right?
sure
So
can.
yeah, and it's annoying after you erase 2 times, the paper tears apart. But like it's not. I understand, especially when you get longer composition pieces and you want to start moving around paragraphs. Like it's not functional to have that on paper and pencil. But okay, so then in the absence, it sounds like the tool is primarily crucial, right? Essential and vital in the early years, K through 5, in an intervention method or in a supplemental method, which is, listen, we got this finish line coming up. We absolutely have to get here kicking and screaming. We're going to do all these things in person, and then we're going to icing on the cake. We're going to use this mechanism, this technology tool to help us get there at the end. And you see all kinds of little reading programs that are highlighting words and having them sounded out the whole bit. Totally get that. But that's in the extreme cases where you're like, okay, we have an intervention. This student, I mean, I would assume the average student is not having these interventions and falling behind to the point where they need to be plugged into a computer, 3 times a week at night. So like, what are the other pieces then? Or is it just we give the tool for kind of teacher discretion, the skill of teaching, to allow them to supplement as they see fit?
There's a level of teacher discretion with that, but we have guidance documents in terms of here is a scope and sequence for when those tools are introduced, and here's best use and best practices of those tools. And in fact, we have a department, the technology integration department, who leads that work, who leads that professional development teachers, who says, yes, this is the digital tool that you have access to. And yes, it is a supplemental resource, but here's how it can be used to enhance instruction and to enhance the evidence behind we know a student has mastered this standard or not. And so rather than just placing the tool and saying, teachers use this at your discretion, that is part of that. But really it's around providing some very clear guidance around how it should be used, when it should be used, in what circumstances it should be used, and the best tools on the laptop in order to make that happen. We have a full department dedicated to that who really is focused on professional development in classrooms, working with teachers and administrators to make sure that tool is used wisely.
That makes a lot of sense. As far as academic enrichment? Because again, a lot of times people worried about picking up, as we should, picking up the people that are struggling the most. But as far as academic enrichment, West Ada in particular has really high-end options. The Fast Forward program that allows for kind of dual enrollment starting in 7th grade with additional funding toward that. And that's statewide. It's not unique to West Ada. But what are things in your mind as the academic officer that you think are available to the population of West Ada that are being least utilized or least understood?
They're being least utilized and least understood. Well, one, I think it's important for families to know that there are pathways for enrichment at all levels, right? There's a pathway for enrichment at an elementary level where we differentiate instruction within the classroom or provide some opportunities for enrichment just during the school day.
Like gate programs.
You get into middle school, you get into middle school, and then you create some of those opportunities through your courses, right? It's an opportunity for enrichment. It's for students to be able to transfer what is those foundational skills and understanding into other subject areas or extended subject areas, right? And some of that extends into what would be, performing arts and fine arts. Some of that focuses into academics and mathematics, right? Like these additional courses that I can take at multiple levels that allows my child to continually progress down what is an advanced level of learning. Like they can continue these standards while still making sure that every student has the foundational skills and understandings at their grade level. And we call that, core curriculum. That is their core curriculum at that grade level. We have to ensure that every student is mastered so they can be successful in the next one. But with every core curriculum is this opportunity to enrich and extend. That takes place in middle school as well, like I just said. And then in high school, that's where I think a lot of people go to in terms of advanced courses, in terms of, opportunities for, opportunities with concurrent credit with many of our colleges, right? It allows for opportunities to earn your associate's degree at a high school level. So you're leaving college with a degree in your pocket. CTE, CTE shouldn't be seen as just an opportunity. If I don't go to college, well, then I'll do CTE, but that is not the case. It is an enriching opportunity for students that provides this opportunity to just extend their path, right? If I want to move into this path in engineering, or I want to move into this path in collision.
You're jumping on top of the.
Oh, there we go.
There you go, buddy.
So there you go. So now I sound much better. Thank you.
A little bit.
I appreciate that. But CTE shouldn't be seen as this pathway where if I don't go to college, then I'll do CTE or I'll enter the workforce. It should be seen as I have a whole menu of opportunities in front of me. And whether or not that menu of opportunities opens up, yes, it opens up career doors for me because I've taken a lot of advanced courses and it's going to open up this college career opportunity for me. But concurrently, if I'm taking, engineering, or I'm heading down a welding path where I'm heading to auto collision, or I'm headed into culinary arts, that in combination with all of the opportunities that I've had for advanced courses, that's a student who's going to walk away in year 13 with a tremendous amount of resources in their back pocket. And the future's wide open for them. Right.
Dr. Bubb was in here a couple months ago talking about a bunch of these things, but he was also saying that I think they had about 200 students from West Ada that actually graduated recently with their associate's degree. So they're graduating with a college degree while they're graduating from high school, which is just so fantastic, and the state paid for it.
Absolutely. And that opportunity is available across all of our high schools.
Right.
Nope, it's not dependent. That is another thing that's important to us as well, is that we want to make sure that if that opportunity is afforded at one high school in West Ada, it's afforded to all students in any high school in West Ada.
Question for you about schools of choice. Now, West Ada is very fortunate to have a ton of schools of choice, and these could be centered around the arts, they could be centered around STEM, they could be centered around high-end academics, international baccalaureate. What's different about the curriculum at, say, Eagle High School versus, say, Renaissance High School? Like, what's the difference?
A lot of times it's about opportunities for additional courses within that, right? And so because the pathway for a student that enters Renaissance, there are more advanced courses at Renaissance that a student has access to that way. They're more readily available within that particular school that way. I think too, when you talk like an elementary school of choice, there's additional opportunities within music and STEM that are built into a student's day, while still knowing, though, that those core content standards are presented to students and mastered by students regardless of what school they attend, whether it's a school of choice or not. So there are a few additional opportunities in elementary through our schools of choice that way. When you move into middle school, very similar to that, right? So again, there's opportunities for enrichment at those schools of choice, and then at high school within Renaissance. I also want to note too, though, that the opportunities for students who are advancing through the curriculum are there, but we also have our academy systems. We have our alternative systems to ensure that all students, no matter where they fall in those standards, that they're going to get the support they need and they have just as much opportunity to walk across the stage.
So the bottom line is the schools of choice are really focused on just additional options. You're still
just some additional option, but you still get everything every student at West Ada needs to know in order to be successful.
Gotcha. We've talked about quite a few things. Is there anything that I've missed that you would really want to express? Talked about tech. We've talked about priorities for West Ada, the platform, the whole thing.
No, I think I'm very proud to be West Ada for a few reasons. And one of that has to be with, I think we have the very best people in the classrooms, in leadership, and their ultimate goal at the end of the day is to ensure we have systems of success in place for all students, that students walk away with foundational knowledge and proficient knowledge of the standards that we have said, this is so critically important when you leave our system. We're going to make absolutely sure that along the path, we line you up for success with that. And we're very proud of the fact that our students achieve greatly, that we have systems in place to ensure that all students can, and that those opportunities exist K-12. And we're very dedicated to that. And so much so that a lot, that we're willing to pour a tremendous amount of resources into it. And we're just willing to have these great conversations with our community to say, here's what West Ada can do for your child. And here's what we're willing to do for the community, because at the end of the day, it really is about strengthening our community.
Right. And again, I very much enjoy West Ada. I've been very, very pleased with the education my kids have been getting. So again, thank you for coming in. I appreciate you going to bat and explaining what West Ada is and is not about. And we'll have to do this again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.